a quick faffing around video with yeast. So, I'm curious about yeast, and the dried yeast, it's fast acting, and so it's kind of only got so much life in it. But I was kind of thinking, can we keep it alive for a little bit longer than usual? It's out of date, this one, but I used some about a month back, and it was still okay. So I want to add it to some water. That's probably not enough water. And I'm going to add some sugar to it. And it's normally the sugar that it feeds off, and as long as there's sugar and there's liquid, then it should stay alive and keep replicating itself, reproducing itself, type of thing. So it should keep as long as there's sugar in there, it should keep foaming and living and creating more yeast. So I'm just kind of curious, because I'd like some. I was faffing around with homemade Marmite, and it was awful, and it was down to the yeast. So I was kind of thinking that maybe we could make our own yeast, and our yeast solid, and kind of use that in it. So if it tastes better, the flavour was it was the yeast that was the problem. The vegetable stock that I made was kind of quite delicious, and that flavour kind of came through, but the bitterness of the yeast and the hops kind of made it disgusting, to say the least. So if this yeast is still alive or still usable, we'll see if it keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing if we keep feeding it a bit of sugar, rather than just going out and buying some normal bread making yeast, the live stuff that comes in like a block. It's a bit chalky. We'll see if we can make some out of this. So that's that. I'm already waffling. We'll see if anything happens. So the yeast worked, but and it frothed, and then I added more sugar, and then it stopped frothing. So I don't know if I've added more sugar, too much sugar to it, because it tastes sweet. It's yeasty and it's sweety. So I don't know if the yeast has just got a certain amount of life in it. Like adding baking powder or something. You know, like baking powder kind of froths, adds some air to it, rises something, and then it's a chemical reaction, and it just kind of stops. The chemical reaction runs out. And I think dried yeast is the same, but just to make sure, I've bought some more yeast. And I'm going to add some yeast to the yeast, and we're going to see if I put too much sugar in and I've killed it, or it's just got a certain amount of life into it. In it, I think it's just got a certain amount of life in it, and that's it, and then it dies. We'll see how we go. So that's that. We'll carry on with that, and we'll see how that is in the morning. And then I've got the last of some champagne yeast, which I was faffing around. I was making cider, I think. I was making cider, and I made some whey. I fermented some whey, and I fermented some. I made some mead as well. So I bought some champagne yeast. Before I collected my own yeast, which is just, you find it on the skins of grapes, and what you simply do is you squash the grapes up, and then leave them with the skins on in a container, and it slowly starts to ferment, and it collects bubbles, and that's how I collected yeast that way. And then that was the first time I was faffing around, because it was lockdown and there wasn't much to do, and I was kind of like, oh, let's have a play around and faffing with things. So then I kind of thought, well, you can only go so far with the yeast that you collect from grapes. Let's see if we can make something a little bit stronger, and so I bought some proper champagne yeast, which is this. So in here we have some sugar and we have some water, and last time I used it, nothing happened. So I think it might have expired, because these things only last so long in a container. It'll be about 18 months old now, something like that. So it might have died, but we'll see. but it's the last of it. I can't imagine. I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to try and make something and use this yeast if it doesn't work. And if I'm going to do something else with champagne yeast, I'll just buy a little bit more champagne yeast. So to see if it's still alive after 18 months, we'll simply add it to that and see what the champagne yeast does. And then I'm going to go and see my friends tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. In a couple of days, I'm going to go and see my friends who brew beer. And I'm going to go and pick his brain about yeast. And he might have some yeast. He might have some beer yeast, and he might have some advice on what we can do with some maybe some beer yeast, and see if we can grow the yeast without actually making any alcohol. That's kind of what I want to do. But anyway, just a bit of faff as always. Right, so the champagne yeast is dead, unfortunately. So the last thing I tried to ferment with it didn't ferment, and that's why, because the champagne yeast is dead. So this is still foaming slightly, so I don't know if let's see if it tastes sweet still. Yeah, it's still sweet, so it means that there's some food in there for it to carry on growing. So as long as it's sweet, there's sugar in there and there's liquid, so it should, or maybe it's stopped, but we'll keep an eye on that and see if it carries on producing carbon dioxide and bubbling and growing gases and all that kind of stuff. So that's alright, so we'll keep that going. I'm not going to add any more yeast to it, I'm not going to add any more sugar to it, but the first packet that I added obviously worked, and then I added a bit more sugar, so I might have actually killed the yeast with too much sugar. So it might carry on still working. It doesn't look like it's burnt itself out just yet. I'll tell you what we'll do. To get a better idea, we'll just get rid of those bubbles into there, because we're going to throw that one away. So get rid of those bubbles, and then we can see if it does actually produce more bubbles, and then that'll get a better indication if it's still alive. So it's only a bit of faffing around, so not many bubbles in there. Give it a shake around, so we'll see if it gets more bubblier than that. So it still looks like it's eating away. So all that nonsense about fast-acting yeast only having a certain amount of lifespan is a load of rubbish. So let's scrape that off, and then I'll just taste my finger. Yeah, it's still sweet. It's starting to taste really kind of quite yeasty as well. So it's getting a bit late. I'm not sure I can be bothered doing it tonight. So we'll see how it is in the morning, and then what I think I'll do is we'll add that to the other packets of yeast that I've got, and I'll put it in a container with some sugar and some water, and then we're going to see if we can actually make a bit of a yeast culture. And if we can make a yeast culture with that, then we can turn that yeast culture, as we keep feeding it and keep growing it, once it's got to a decent size, then we might be able to make some Marmite out of that. And that's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? But also, it can dispel the myth that fast-acting yeast has only got a certain amount of lifespan. It keeps producing and producing and producing, so it's been going for 24 hours now, you know, and it's still alive. So there we go. Is that interesting? To me, yes. So it's still going, which is a good sign, isn't it? So let's let's turn that light on. That's a bit better. Let's add some more yeast to this jar, and then we'll more yeast will mean that it speeds up the process. I suppose it's a little bit of a waste, but I don't want to be doing this forever. You know, I suppose you can take a small amount of yeast and keep growing it and growing it and growing it and growing it and growing it, but I just want to kind of speed up the process. So those, and then how much? A little bit of sugar. I should have put some sugar up beforehand, shouldn't I? Let's go for a teaspoon of sugar. actually water in first. And then mix it around. And then that much sugar to start off with. Mix it around it, mix it around it. So, that's out of the way. And then there's this toast. It's starting to taste a little bit alcoholic. I know bread yeast doesn't make particularly nice tasting alcohol. You need to use proper brewer's yeast for that. It makes alcohol, it just doesn't make it, it's not particularly nice tasting. It's just how it is. But it's starting to smell a little bit alcoholic, a little bit beery. That'll do. Right, so we'll see what happens there. It should explode into life, really. But anyway, there we go. Experimentation continues. The yeast has died. Well, stopped being active. I don't know if it's still just dormant. But as you can see there, there's some water on top of it. And there's a yeast underneath. So I think, let's give it a taste. Let's pour off the water from the top, or the liquid, whatever it is. And then let's give the liquid a taste. And the yeast at the bottom a taste. And see if maybe we want to have a go at turning it into Marmite. What does the water taste like? Little bit bitter. Little bit bitter. What does the yeast at the bottom taste like? A little bit bitter. A little bit bitter. Let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. So I've got some vegetables. The vegetable stock from the other batch of yeast extract that I made at the back. So we'll reduce that down at the back, and then we're going to cook this at the front. There's some yeast on the bottom there. And what we'll do, we'll use some of the vegetable stock to just loosen that at the bottom. Got a lid, just so we get all that flavour out of there. Turn it on, low heat. Yeah, it's got most of it out. So we'll reduce that down so it'll thicken it up, intensify the flavour, and we're going to see how we go. So, low heat, just to evaporate it off. What did I do beforehand? I had it cooking for ages, didn't I? But I think that was mostly down to making sure the yeast fully died. I think it was. Yeah. I think that's kind of why I did it, and I don't think I need to kind of do that. I think we can just get away with reducing the yeast down. Might move that one to this one, but you can't see that one as well. So I think we'll heat that up. We'll reduce it down. We'll see how we go. We might reduce that down as well, out of curiosity. Yes, I think we will. So reduce that water down as well, because there is flavour in there, so we might actually get something out of that. So we'll just put that on another burner, and we'll reduce that down and see what happens. Yeah, so that's what we'll do. So we'll reduce everything down, and then we'll combine, and we'll have a taste and see what happens. Right, we've reduced down and we have thickened up, and I'm slightly concerned that I'm going to end up burning that pan. That's probably about the right kind of consistency for. It's hot now, so it'll thicken up as it gets cold. So we've got all that goodness around the outside of the pan, so I don't kind of want to waste that. And I kind of think we'll be better off in the smaller pan. So How's this taste? That's alright. So, what we'll do, we'll pour that into there. I know that's going to taste nice. This will transfer into the smaller pan, and then that's going to be a nice consistency as that. So we'll transfer that into the smaller pan, and then we can rinse out this pan with that liquid, just to get all that goodness off the sides. Out of the way. I can swish this around here. Then add them all together, and scrape that off there. Add them all together, and then carry on reducing down. So then we'll get all the flavour from the vegetable stock into the yeast. Right there. So just work that around the outside. Get as much off that as possible. But you get the idea. Let it soak a bit, and then I don't think it won't stick to the. That's a non-stick pan, so we won't kind of lose any flavour around the outside. But you can see what I'm doing. So we'll add, once that's cleaned the outside of that pan there, we'll turn that one into that one. Bring it back up to the boil, and then reduce it again. I think we're almost there. I think if I reduce it down any more, it's going to start to burn. Oh, has it already started? Oh, it's just caramelising on the bottom, that's fine. So we'll just keep it moving around. I'm going to have to add some salt as well, so we need to add some salt. I'll add some pre-running salt. Normally I'd use the rock salt, but I actually want it to melt. So, a little bit of salt, can always add a little bit more. It'll darken. It's got bubbles in it at the moment, so that's making it look lighter than it actually is. Yeah, that's not going to cook anymore. We might get a little bit more evaporation, but I don't want to take it down any further than that. No. Right, fresh spoon, and give it a taste. Needs more salt. So vegetable extract is, yeast extract is really kind of quite salty, so it tastes sweet, and that's down to the vegetable stock. And it doesn't taste bitter. So my thoughts are that you could actually buy not the dried yeast but the fresh yeast, and you could make vegetable yeast extract with that instead of the brewer's yeast was just too bitter. More salt. This is a fearful amount of salt, really, but we're only going to use a little bit. There. How does that taste? A little bit more, maybe. It's quite a lot of salt, isn't it, really? There's such a small amount. Actually, I'm thinking about it's a pattern perium, which is a gentleman's relish, which is basically an anchovy butter you could combine them to make an anchovy and yeast type of thing. I wonder if that would work. Probably. It's going to be about the right consistency when it dries. So how many packets of yeast was it? Was it 5 packets of yeast? Or maybe it was 6 packets of yeast that I used. So it kind of works, doesn't it? I suppose if it was fast acting yeast as well, so I think if we'd used fresh yeast and carried on feeding it, we would have got a high yield of yeast from it, and then we could have made more. Don't use that spoon, I'll use my knife. And I was thinking that I think it was a brewer's yeast that was the problem. It was just too bitter. And then I was thinking that when I'm faffing around fermenting things again, like what was I going to make? Oh yeah, I was going to faff around with some peelings from some apples. I was going to ferment them and then turn it into vinegar. I was wondering if maybe I should keep the yeast from the bottom of that, and then when I'm making I'm going to have another go at making ginger beer, and we'll keep the yeast from that as well that forms in the bottom, and then it'll be an interesting yeast extract to make out of those. So like an apple one, like a pear yeast and an apple yeast and a ginger beer yeast, I think would be interesting. So we'll let that cool and then we'll see what it tastes like. But at the moment, nice. It's nice. I think that'll be delicious on a bit of toast, won't it? Right, it's cool. It's set. That's alright, isn't it? It's at room temperature. It's a little bit runnier than normal yeast extract. We don't need too much, do we? So toast with a ridiculous amount of butter. Then we should taste it without. Taste it without first. Now it's cold. Things taste different when they're hot and when they're cold. So that's really nice and not bitter at all. Sorry, I'm eating. Yeah. So that works, and it's really nice. And kind of, as I was thinking before, obviously, if we had some yeast from making some ginger beer, or some mead, or wine, it would give us a different kind of flavour profile of the yeast, which was kind of quite nice. I think I'd avoid using beer yeast, and I suppose just buying some fresh yeast. You could skip the process of me buying the dried yeast and kind of activating it and feeding it and keeping it alive and kind of getting that yeasty residue. I'm sure you could just buy some fresh yeast and kind of add a bit of liquid to it and then cook it out in the pan and then make some vegetable stock, which is pretty straightforward. I'm sure I did a video on it. I'm sure I did like a video on making vegetable stock. It will be somewhere, like a cheap one. So it was like the trimmings of vegetables, and then you just boil it all up, well, simmer it up, boil it, simmer it for an hour, and then puree it, and then pass it through a sieve, and then squeeze out all the excess juice from the pulp, and you get like a lovely flavoured vegetable stock. So yeah, that works. A success. I'm rather quite happy after the disappointment of the one that I made with the beer yeast. There we go, homemade vegetable extract. No, not vegetable extract, yeast extract.